much and glad to see everybody. Um, I'm moderating this webinar, so I'm just gonna start with a little bit of context and grounding, and we'll hear a lot more from our amazing panelists from different perspectives on this issue. But like Adriana said, at NAMA, we've been working on seafood and fisheries issues since the 90s. And our work started with wild fisheries, a lot of which involved educating people about the distinctions between industrialized factory style fishing and fishing that was done by owner operators who were embedded in community, who are intrinsically experts of their local ecosystems, and who are more interested in feeding people than maximizing profits in global markets. And so over the years, we heard more and more about aquaculture from our communities. In 2013, for the first time, the volume of farmed seafood produced worldwide exceeded the volume of wild caught fish. So, in the last few years, we've really committed to doing more work on aquaculture with a similar approach that we had with wild fisheries, knowing that there are some forms of aquaculture that are ancient, rooted in cultural traditions, and have a low impact on the environment. Like Hawaiian fish ponds are an example. And there are other forms like salmon farming, which we'll hear more about, that are all about maximizing production, efficiency, profit on a global scale while externalizing costs. And what externalizing costs means is that these corporations are not paying for the negative consequences of their operations, nor are the costs reflected in the price of the farmed seafood, but rather frontline communities and future generations are the ones that are really paying the price for the negative impacts to people and the environment. And we'll hear about some of these negative impacts as well today. So I find often to understand aquaculture, it's helpful to look at what's happened with land-based agriculture. So many of you likely know of the Green Revolution that happened through the last century. It involved the industrialization of agriculture, the introduction of genetically modified high-yielding monocrops, heavy use of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, and neoliberal policies that really favored global commodity markets over traditional food systems that were diverse and localized and rooted in the seasonality and the rhythms of nature. And the harmful impacts of the Green Revolution are well documented. So they include land grabs or consolidated ownership of land, dispossession of small scale farming communities around the world, dependence on corporate controlled products, everything from seeds to fertilizers to equipment, and devastating environmental impacts, including major contributions to climate change. And the claim behind the Green Revolution was that it was necessary to feed the world. Yet that has also shown to be a false solution. Small scale food producers still feed as much as 70% of the world in actuality. So, despite all these failings of the Green Revolution, we are now seeing mega corporations and governments calling for a blue revolution. And they're using terms like a new blue economy, blue growth. But we have the hindsight of seeing how the Green Revolution played out with the hope that we can prevent it from playing out the same way. And so that's really what this webinar is all about. We've invited you all, folks in our networks, to join because we really want our communities to have the critical tools to analyze this landscape that we're in. So right now in the US, there are powerful lobbies led by big agribusinesses like Cargill, JBS Foods, along with other corporations like Cisco and Merck, who are joining forces with federal agencies and some of the biggest environmental NGOs. And they're exerting influence over academic institutions, community groups, to really push for the expansion of industrial aquaculture in US federal waters. And to be clear, currently there is no industrial aquaculture in US federal waters, which are typically 300 to 200 miles offshore. So this would be really unprecedented. And what we are seeing is that these lobbies, as I said, are painting this picture that this is necessary for food security. At the same time, the model that they're pushing for is based on industrial agriculture and factory farming. And we know that this model has really decimated food sovereignty in so many communities around the world because it's changed the way that people farm from being able to provide diverse foods for their communities to now having to farm monocultures for global trade. It's making consumers dependent on imports and producers dependent on exports. And there are many other solutions for improving the ways that we feed our communities. Some examples are, protecting our working waterfronts, investing in localized infrastructure for processing and distribution, embracing a wider variety of seafood that's already available, and also a wider variety of techniques to get as much out of each fish that we can, whether that's cooking whole fish, preserving, pickling, fermenting. There's so much you can do. And we're also seeing these lobbies put out this narrative of aquaculture under one umbrella, everything from small scale oyster farms to large scale finfish farms. And this conflation is really damaging. So, with farming, I think many people know there's a difference between a family farm that's raising chickens on pasture and a factory chicken farm. And we need to have the same analysis when it comes to aquaculture. Otherwise, we lose the plot. The big corporate players can say that they're working on behalf of the small guys when really all of their resources and powers are going to advocating for these big offshore operations. And actually, if they succeed, the localized infrastructure and working waterfronts that the smaller aquaculture producers depend on will increasingly vanish because they won't really be necessary anymore. So, all of that to say, we are at a really important inflection point. There's a lot of work to be done in terms of helping people understand the current context. And that's why I'm so glad that you all are here with us. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Becca Franks. She's an assistant professor of environmental studies at NYU. Her research and teaching lie at the intersection of animal welfare science and environmental conservation, and is driven by the core question, how can science contribute to ongoing efforts to repair human relationships with other animals and the rest of nature?
Great. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. That was really important stage setting. And I'm really honored to be here. I'm really glad to see so many participants in this conversation and the webinar. And thank you all for organizing this at NAMA and Don't Cage Our Oceans. So yeah, I'm going to share my screen here. So as Fanny said, I am an assistant professor at NYU. I have a background in animal welfare science. And so I'm just setting some stuff up here. So I'm going to speak to the animal welfare concerns with this push to expand aquaculture, but also how taking the animal welfare perspective actually unlocks some of these issues that Fanny was just describing. And also, of course, coming from an academic institution, this work really speaks to how even academia and science has been captured by this industrial corporate push of blue foods. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the fisheye view of sustainability of blue foods. Okay, let me just get this started. So Nature Publishing Group, Nature Journal is like the most important scientific journal in all of academia. It can be sort of a game changer to get a paper published in Nature. They had a whole issue, series of studies a couple years ago on blue foods. Blue food system must be transformed to end hunger, malnutrition, tackle climate change, and conserve biodiversity. And so they have this collection that's exploring what aquatic foods can bring to the table. This was driven by a background organization called the Blue Foods Assessment Group. And they are just sort of like an organizing aggregator for academia industry across the world, making the case that blue foods are like the key to our future. The United Nations, the Economic and Social Affairs on Sustainable Development has blue foods are vital to global food security. The World Economic Forum, Blue Food Partnership, catalyzing science-based action towards healthy and sustainable blue foods, etc. So now I'm just going to pull some quotes from some of the papers that were published in this push in 2021. So the Nature portfolio is shining a spotlight on how aquatic food systems, sometimes called blue foods, can end hunger and accelerate the creation of a truly sustainable global food system. Then in a specific paper published in Nature, The authors write about how the blue foods are relatively low average environmental pressures. They represent an opportunity to improve nutrition with low environmental burdens, and they align with the Sustainable Development Goals at the UN. And then another journal, Global Food Security, blue foods are extraordinarily diverse and often rich in essential micronutrients, and they're more environmentally sustainable than terrestrial animal food sources. So what needs to be unpacked across all of this hype is this key phrase: this blue foods are extraordinarily diverse. They're often rich in essential nutrients, and they're often produced in ways that are more environmentally sustainable than terrestrial animal food sources. But, that sort of blanket statement with these caveats is sort of like saying nothing at all. You could say exactly the same thing about terrestrial food. Terrestrial foods are extraordinarily diverse. They're the key to our future. They are the answer to feeding, global food insecurity. But of course, the details really matter. And then beyond just the details, mattering, in aquaculture, we're dealing with an even more diverse system than terrestrial. So, and this is not even considering fisheries at the moment. So this is just aquaculture, the farming of aquatic organisms. So here, this is a study that I did with some colleagues in 2021, looking at the number of species in the global food production system by these big phylogenetic groupings. So mollusks, which are, clams and mussels and other bivalves. Arthropoda, those are the crabs and lobsters and shrimps. And chordata are the fishes, basically. So the bony finned fishes. And then there's other invertebrates as well. So now what you can see in this graph is how many species are in the global food production system. And we're now well into the hundreds of different species now being farmed globally in aquaculture. And you can see this dotted line here that I'm going to highlight in red. That is the total number of species in terrestrial farming. So we're looking at 10 times more species being farmed in aquaculture, each of those species with different needs, different inputs that are required to take care of them, different lifespans, a huge diversity of life that's being farmed compared to terrestrial systems where we basically have somewhere, upper estimate is 20, but really it's like around 5 different species that are being farmed globally. So you take these hundreds of species and you multiply them by the number of production methods that are used. There's different production methods for even within the same species, and you end up with an extraordinarily heterogeneous system. So you have to be extremely skeptical of any sort of blanket statements like blue foods are the future. So just again, taking this animal welfare perspective on the details, this fisheye view of that heterogeneity, I just want to call your attention to 4 different species here that are in global production now in aquaculture systems. You have here the red swamp crayfish, which is actually a species that engages in parental care that lasts 3 to 4 months, including signaling to their offspring when there's danger. In the upper right-hand panel, you have the bumphead parrotfish. They aggregate in the hundreds under a full moon during spawning. See the bottom left panel are tiger puffers that have distinct burrowing patterns dependent on individual personalities. And D, the burbot, which construct trenches many times the length of their own body, up to 350 meters below the surface of freshwater lengths, very, very deep down. All 4 of these species are just, 4 of the hundreds of species that are being farmed, just to give you some traction on the heterogeneity that we're talking about here. So this is a pretty complicated figure, so I'm just going to unpack it very slowly. On the bottom, horizontal axis, we have the price in US dollars per ton. And that goes up very quickly. It's an algorithmic scale. So at the bottom end, it's hundreds of dollars per ton, and the upper end, it's billions of dollars per ton. So it really ramps up quickly. And then on the vertical axis, we have the number of known welfare risks risk factors for a species. So high risk factors would be they're migratory, they live complex lives, they live in very deep waters, they're carnivorous, they're long-lived. Those are all species level characteristics that are going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to serve within a farm production system. And then on the lower end, with very few welfare risks, would be animals that are sedentary, filter feeders, they live in shallow waters, they're short-lived. Now, so you have price against animal welfare. Animal welfare is often posed in opposition to price, that it's only something that you can afford if you're very wealthy, and that, it's this elitist pursuit to care about the animals, and that, if we really want to care about humans, we really need to disregard animal welfare. So you'd expect that the most lowest welfare risk animals would cost the most. And each little dot now that you're about to see is a species. And then you have the lines by those big groupings that I talked to you about before. And what you can see here is that we found exact opposite pattern. What this means is that the most expensive species to produce are also the ones that have the most welfare risks. And the ones that are the cheapest to produce have the fewest welfare risks. And we have even aquatic plants there at the bottom with no welfare risks. So you can see in this bottom left quadrant, there's dozens and dozens of species that are affordable and have very low welfare risks. And then you have the upper quadrant here. There are also a handful of species that have really high market prices and extremely welfare risky. And of course, this is where a lot of the investment is going, on the backs of this idea that blue foods are going to feed the world. And now, anecdotally, the bottom left-hand quadrant also tend to be low environmental input species that don't require much energy or water or create a lot of pollution, in contrast to these high welfare risk species that are very expensive that also are creating a lot of problems environmentally. So you can see that if you disaggregate the system and really look at the species level, rather than taking this blanket level perspective of like blue foods are fantastic, yes, there are areas that we can look at that maybe would make a lot of sense to invest in, but then there's other areas that are actually counterproductive to all of the stated goals of the expansion of blue foods. So just in the last minute or so here that I have, I want to talk about the specific risks of mariculture expansion. So that's farming in the open ocean offshore in the, it's like aquaculture, but in the ocean. It's a specific kind of aquaculture. And this idea that it's creating environmental and animal impacts. A master's student, Lori Sellers, and I were interested in sort of assembling the evidence of the impacts of this proposed mariculture expansion, which is new. It's happening globally. It hasn't ramped up yet, but there's plenty of science that's being, invested in sort of figuring out where would be the best places to expand mariculture. And we discovered that unlike in terrestrial systems, where if you're talking about expanding agriculture, you would be talking about deforestation, there's no equivalent term for the destruction of ocean life through the expansion of aquaculture, farming in the ocean. And so we introduced this new term, dewilding, to create an umbrella to sort of like organize and help us think through the costs of mariculture expansion. So we have this little image on the right here, where on the left-hand side, you have little to no dewilding. People are enjoying the ocean. The animals are diverse and thriving, engaging in their own, interspecies interactions. Then you put some farming systems into the ocean, and the dolphins begin to be attracted to these farming systems. And essentially, if we go to a future that we're not there at, but the trajectory that we're on, where the ocean is more and more filled of these cages, these open net cages, and more dolphins are being, and other sea life are being attracted to them, that's creating conflicts with humans. The animals themselves are suffering in these open net pens as the stocking and production density gets higher and higher. We are risking a lot. And so for us, dewilding is this idea that there's risks of environmental degradation, harms to wildlife, harms to the captive animals, and conceptual shifts in our relationship changing with the animals that live in the ocean. And so it's this process of privileging our narrow human interests and perspectives against the interests and consideration of other beings and other life on this planet. And I just want to end with this very, I think, provocative observation that we made in the paper. We looked across 4 years. We found over 770 scientific papers published across many, many different journals. There's a lot of evidence of dewilding. It's being documented widely in the scientific literature. And yet, the conclusion of most of these papers were either silent on expansion, they didn't say one way or another, or were actually documenting these harms and still in the conclusion we're in favor of continuing the expansion. So just thinking about this influence over academia and science itself, which is supposed to be unbiased. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to the hearing the other presentations and any questions.
Thanks so much, Becca. That chart on animal welfare risks and costs is really striking. All right, well, next we're going to move to Chef Cassandra. Chef Cassandra works across Georgia and South Carolina to protect waterways and food systems that sustain both people and marine life. She coordinates Healthy Communities Augusta with Savannah Riverkeeper, co-founded a co-op called Goodness Gracious Grocery, and serves as the acting executive director of Fresh Future Farm in North Charleston. Her advocacy centers on keeping finfish free, protecting coastal and river ecosystems, and advancing just sustainable food economies from inland rivers to the open ocean.
Oh, thank you so much, Rainey, for that great introduction. Um, I'll wait for a second for my slides to come up, but I will tell you, great, awesome. My name is Cassandra Laughlin, and I'm a chef and a community advocate. And one of the things that I love to do is talk about how the stories of our food and communities are deeply connected, especially along our coast and shorelines. Today, I want to talk about how authentic food isn't just good eating, it's good economics, and it's key to protecting our culture, our waters, and our livelihoods. Next slide, please. Food is never just food. It's our culture, it's our memory, and again, it's our livelihood. Every plate tells a story. Coastal communities, specifically, seafood is identity. Shrimp and grits, blue crab, oysters, and the smell of the salt in the air. When food loses its connection to place, so does the community. As chefs, we're all storytellers. We translate local ingredients into experiences that feed the body, feed the mind, and feed the soul of not only ourselves, but people that come visit our homes. And when we use local seafood, we keep the story and the jobs behind it alive. Next slide, please. Coastal culture creates a billion-dollar tourism industry. And that industry depends on local seafood that keeps heritage and the revenues anchored into community. Tourists come to these places for a sense of place, and they expect food that is as real as the marsh, as real as the ocean. If you're in Savannah, as real as the cobblestone streets, and that's what they deserve. Next slide, please. So blue washing, we have a huge example of that in the Charleston area with what I like to call the Charleston shrimp scandal. And I've been in the Charleston area a lot more recently, probably once a week for the last 3 or 4 months. And I love when people start talking about it and talking, especially the tourists, talking about famous restaurants or things that are on the Fodor's list that they should go to that have actually used imported shrimp. I actually kind of chime in and try to whip them into a frenzy, because the more awareness we have, the more the word will spread and local seafood will be supported. So here are a couple quotes of how this blue washing impacts our fishermen. So, or fisher folk, really. When we serve imported seafood and call it local, we are not just misleading diners, we're ending the very trust that people have here. And that's exactly what happened in Charleston. This is really spread like wildfire. Restaurants, 25 of the most popular were caught selling seafood that was imported as local shrimp. And that is the perfect example of blue washing. It's the language and the term that promotes sustainability, but has a really, really ugly secret. And one of the things that struck us the most is that one of the fishermen said, "We've tied up our boats in the last couple of years because people are buying imports instead of local." People thought they were supporting local shrimpers, but those families were forced to stop working because of the imports. Blue washing just doesn't hurt the fish in our environment. It hurts our trust, local culture, and the local economies. Next slide, please. So here's the opposite of blue washing. It's really authentic local seafood and the impact that it can have in a community. So I'm going to use this example to show what sustainability looks like. 2 weeks ago, we had a group of 40 people come from an organization called Why Hunger. And they really wanted to get into what does it feel like to indulge in the local culture, eat local seafood, support local folks. We ate shrimp and grits, blue crab, and shrimp cakes. And then we had fried fish from the Cooper River. We also included chefs, advocates, and community members. Over that one weekend, this group generated almost 40 people $100,000 into the local economy. That was money going to hotel staff, servers, bus drivers, and fisher folk, not corporate supply chains. In this process, we also were able to raise $10,000 for local charities, and 40 community service hours were given to various projects and actually on a farm. One small group trip is an example of how sustainable travel can feed an entire community. Next slide, please. So sustainable seafood really feeds a community and feeds the state. So this was about, I think it was $46,000 and how it was distributed. 70% went to lodging and hotels. Which was clear. And then 16% of it went to taxes and 13% of it went to tips, which was a huge influx of capital. Now, imagine this. This particular case was Charleston. There are 35,000 folks that come to Charleston every weekend. Out of that 35,000, within that, there are even like 90 to 175 folks that are traveling in a group. The group of 40 that we had in that weekend in Charleston was 0.1%, and they infused $100,000 into the city. If 1% of folks of groups traveled in the same way and really concentrated on enjoying the local culture and the local seafood, it would generate $10 million additional dollars for the city of Charleston. Next slide, please. So what folks don't realize is that what's in the air goes into the ocean. What is in the ocean or the rivers or the waters and the lakes goes back to the land. So Fanny mentioned I am now the acting executive director for Fresh Future Farm in Charleston, South Carolina. I have a very deep understanding of how the ocean and the waters impact the soil. So a common thing, especially for nonprofit farmers, they're always looking for free stuff, free mulch, free wood chips, free fertilizer. So a lot of times industrial fish farms take their waste and they turn it into a fish emulsion, which is basically fish poop, ground up bits of fish that they didn't use, and it can be used as a fertilizer on farms. And it sounds really great and really sustainable that they're doing this great work and helping farms. But honestly, when those fish come from over-farmed or polluted waters, that pollution travels from the sea and into the land. In Charleston County alone, about 10% of farmers or 50 plus farmers use fish emulsions as a source of fertilizer. They're trying to do the right thing, but they're at the mercy of what is in that barrel of waste and poop from those farms. So when we protect our coastal lands and the fish and the ecosystem, we are also protecting our vegetative food supply. Local seafood keeps nutrients and revenue in the community. So it creates a clean loop where healthy waters produce healthy fish, shells, and compost. And these crops in turn nourish people. The industrial system breaks that loop and they export profit and import pollution. Next slide, please. So we talked about how do we change this and what can we do? If you are talking with people, businesses, industry that don't care about the ecosystem, don't care about the oceans, it's not a scientific poll, but most people that I've dealt with that don't care about the environment tend to care about economics and money. And that's where you can make that connection for them. So if you make the point and share the numbers, they immediately become interested. And the work that is done at NAMA and Don't Cage Our Ocean really is a tie to community advocates, fisher folk and farmers, and the legislative community. Real change can only happen through coalitions. Together, when we link community advocacy, legislative change, and industry collaboration, we can make a huge difference. Shared values create shared values, as I like to say. And when we work together, sustainability becomes both policy and practice. Next slide, please. When people say things like save the ocean and don't cage our ocean, it can sound very distant to people that are not in the industry. But for people who work and live on the coast, the ocean is their paycheck. To the people that live on the coast, it's their pantry. And it's also our production and source of food supply. Every shrimp, every crab, every meal from these waters carry both culture and currency. So if people can't see the ocean's worth in the ecology, tell them it's economy, because sustainable seafood sustains us all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chef. Thank you for being such a powerful advocate always and really walking us through how sustainable seafood can sustain local communities, economies, cultures. So next up, we have Natasha Hurley, who is joining us from London. She is the Deputy Director of Food Rise, which aims to transform the food system for climate, nature, and justice. She's devoted much of the past 2 decades to exposing irresponsible practices in corporate supply chains and spent several years advocating for policies to tackle climate change and ozone depletion at the UN level. Alongside her role at Feedback or Food Rise, she is a trustee for Somerset Wildlands, a game-changing organization creating space for nature through rewilding.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Fanny. I'm just going to share my screen and I hope it works. You will tell me if it works. Please do, because it's always a bit of an experiment. I think I have to make it into a presentation, which is here. Here we go. Great. Right, so please do shout if anything goes wrong, because I don't trust the tech. But I know that we're probably quite pressed for time today, and we don't have an hour to talk about this, but just to say that there is so much to say on blue washing and aquaculture, and I could have put together a much longer presentation given the sheer amount of material available. In particular, I feel that this presentation lacks a section on debunking, but I know that I'm talking to a very informed audience who's already quite well aware probably of the issues with aquaculture and the misinformation shared by aquaculture companies in that context. So I want to focus today on a particularly powerful part of the global aquaculture industry, which has witnessed huge growth since the 1970s. and which is a huge suck on natural resources, including incredibly millions of tons of wild caught fish that go into the production of fish meal and fish oil every year. And the industry I'm talking about is the salmon farming industry. So I want to provide a very brief intro on sort of key market dynamics and players before diving into a case study on the world's biggest salmon producer, Mowi, a Norwegian multinational company with a turnover of 5.5 billion euros in 2023, to illustrate some of the issues with blue washing in the salmon farming industry. So just to very quickly breeze through this, I think most of you know that salmon farming has gone through an astronomical rise over the past decades, from relative obscurity, if not outright obscurity, in the 1970s. You see that it's the production of salmon, farm salmon globally, has grown to significant levels. The big four countries producing farm salmon are Norway, Chile, the United Kingdom, so Scotland, and North America. And then there are other countries like Iceland bringing up the rear. Mowi is the biggest producer in Norway, and it's actually the leading producer of farmed salmon in the world currently. Now, over the past few decades, we've seen increasing consolidation of the sector. So this graph shows how in the space of a few decades in Norway, to the left of that graph, you see that we started out with over 60, well, up to 70 companies producing farmed salmon. And over the decades, that's shrunk to just over 10 companies. The 10 largest firms in the salmon farming sector account for 90% of total licenses. And you've got the top four markets there, as I've mentioned. The EU plus UK and US are by far the largest markets for Atlantic salmon. So through our work at FoodRise, including last year's Blue Empire report, we've documented the problems associated with industrial salmon production over the past few years. I'm not going to go into detail here on those, because I really wanted to focus on the blue washing. But needless to say, I'd be very happy to fill you in. Me and my colleagues would be happy to fill you in on the issues with salmon farming. And I really recommend that you read our Blue Empire report that we published last year to get the lowdown. The big issue that we faced, or we focused on at FoodRise, is the food competition that's created by the global salmon farming industry, which, as I said, is sucking literally millions of tons of fish out of the ocean every year to feed farmed salmon. So here we go. Here's the case study on Mowi. Why focus on Mowi? It's the biggest producer of farmed salmon, and it's also one of the top four producers of aquafeed globally. And I was actually tempted to just send you Mowi's annual report and kind of sit back and let you read it for 10 minutes before doing this presentation, because in the slides that follow, you'll see that Mowi really is a superstar when it comes to blue washing. Now, I wanted to look at a few tropes that Mowi uses when it comes to blue washing, but also some tactics. So first of all, to look at the tropes, and Mowi's kind of overarching claim is that it's leading the blue revolution. And here you see its sustainability strategy from March 2021, as well as its landing page on leading the blue revolution, where it says, our goal is to provide a growing world population with delicious, healthy and nutritious food from the ocean in a way that respects our planet and allows local communities to flourish. What's not to like in that statement, you wonder? In terms of the sort of top tropes under the banner of that blue revolution, we've got the clean, green and kind tropes. So I guess the number one trope there is that Mowi salmon is a nutritional powerhouse, so really focusing on health. Certainly salmon farming companies like to talk a lot about the micronutrients that salmon contains, leaving aside the fact that the fish that are fed to farm salmon in the form of wild caught fish are themselves absolutely chock full of precious micronutrients, and in fact are being taken away from countries in the world that have really big issues with food security. Mowi also likes to talk about the fact that it's the most sustainable protein producer, and takes great pride in that statement, which we have, and others beside us have highlighted as being a very dubious and questionable statement at best. And there's a lot of talk on the website about how Mowi is contributing to a circular economy. And they're talking here about the new closed systems providing innovative waste management because the waste is filtered out and transported to biogas tanks. A circular approach showing how farm-raised salmon from Norway is setting new sustainable aquaculture standards. Now, I just wanted to dwell quickly also on the food security dimension of this, because food security is also an area where Mowi really presents itself as a poster child, literally, in fact. So to the top right of the slide, you have a screenshot from Mowi's website, corporate website, where it talks about providing its customers with 8 million meals a day. Elsewhere on the website, there are posts about how the world actually needs more food from the ocean, and the sort of subtext of that is that the world needs Mowi to produce more farmed salmon. I wanted to dwell here on food security claims because, as I said, Foodrise's work over the past decade, nearly a decade, has been to expose the food feed competition that is being created by the way the salmon farming industry, key among the key players, Mowi, is driving a very extractive model, or creating a very extractive model, where it's using resources from the natural world to essentially power its business model and expand production. Now, in terms of tactics, I couldn't have this conversation without talking about the use of misleading or euphemistic language and buzzwords. So I just harvested, and I say harvest because I've got harvest there, top of the list. I just went through the website and took some of the more egregious examples, but there are many more besides these. So harvest instead of catching, killing fish. So we have a term like responsible ocean harvesting that sounds fantastic. It sounds like something that you'd really want to be associated with, but what they really mean is killing millions of tons of fish, both wild caught fish and then, of course, the salmon that they're producing. We have biomass instead of fish. Again, the individual fish that are being killed in the process of either feeding or farming. Farm raised, very wholesome sounding, sustainable, omega-3. I can't underline how much omega-3 is talked about in the context of salmon. Nutritious, nutrient dense, superfood. And affordable is one that I came across the other day. And the question there becomes, affordable for whom? Because this salmon is certainly not supplying food to people in countries where food is, where food security is a kind of systemic issue across society. This next slide is just to highlight some of the kind of blue washing that Mowi is doing in Scotland, where they've got a salmon wagon that has been going around Scotland over the past year or so. Essentially, I would call this more a marketing tool for Mowi Salmon than a charitable endeavour, but they'd like to talk about how they have been raising money for charity. They've raised £21,000 in recent times, and they've served 5,500 portions of salmon. Now, again, for me, that's potentially or arguably more a marketing tool for Mowi than an actual charity. And they've been, obviously spreading the word about how fantastic Mowi farm salmon is to people in Scotland. And similarly, here on the left, you have an article talking about how sustainable salmon farming creates lasting value for coastal communities and supports thousands of families across Norway. Another sort of tactic is presenting full solutions as a way of transitioning salmon farming towards a more sustainable future. And I just took a screenshot here from our report. That in green here you can see some analysis we did looking at Mowi's use of alternative or novel ingredients as a replacement for fish oil and fish meal, because this is something that the salmon farming companies talk about a lot. And we actually found that while Mowi has a target to achieve an inclusion of 10 to 15% ingredients from emerging feed raw materials, so alternatives to fish meal and fish oil made from wild caught fish, in actual fact, in 2022, Mowi feed included 2.5% emerging feed raw materials in its feed, which was a 1.5% decline on the previous year. So clearly they're a long way from achieving their target. And from our perspective, nearly 10 years into working on this issue, we see emerging ingredients and novel ingredients as a full solution. The other tactic I wanted to focus on was the use of imagery and what I would call a sort of quite a cynical use of national brands and heritage. So here you have some beautiful locks, top left-hand corner, fjords in Norway, the Scottish flag, that imagery making its way through to the marketing. And the latest thing that I hadn't come across until I researched this presentation was a fjord salmon burger. So kind of explicitly kind of making that link to the Vikings in Norway. Finally, a word on financialization. So I took this screenshot from Mo's website the other day. The strapline just makes me laugh every time I see it. Caring makes us profitable. And I just wanted to underline the fact that the salmon farming industry has, the growth has been powered by a huge injection of capital over the past several decades, I would argue, but certainly salmon farming is seen as a very attractive place to invest for particularly responsible investors in inverted commas who see that the writing's on the wall for animal livestock, but they're very keen to make returns on investment. And this report on the right-hand side of the screen is a report that Mowi produces every year called the Salmon Farming Industry Handbook, which is actually a treasure trove of information and facts about the industry. It's actually quite a useful resource. But as Mowi puts it, the purpose of this document is to give investors and financial analysts a better insight into the salmon farming industry and what Mowi considers to be the most important value drivers. So I think that just gives you a sense of where Mowi sits and what Mowi is trying to do in driving its brand globally. And very finally, I promise this is final, is this what the future looks like? This image is taken from an industry presentation, I think earlier this year or last year, that was sent to us by a Swedish ally. And it shows a land-based aquaculture system, land-based tanks, drones, and I guess an AI-powered robot being served a platter of farmed salmon on a drone. And from our perspective at Food Rights, this is neither a sustainable nor equitable future. It's certainly not something that we see as being a desirable future. And that's why we're working extremely hard to stop the corporate takeover of aquaculture. And if for our US friends, if you do want to run a campaign, a consumer campaign on Mowi and get Mowi salmon out of supermarkets, helpfully they have a map on their website showing where you can actually buy Mowi farm salmon in the New York region. So feel free to check that out, and I will send the link, I promise, to this later on. But for now, I think that's probably more than my time. And thank you very much for paying attention. And I'm very happy to pick this up in more detail with anybody who's interested. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natasha. I definitely encourage folks to check out those reports. A lot of people don't know about that net loss of protein, where we're depleting wild fish from communities in the global south and producing farmed salmon for markets in wealthy countries, which is just totally backwards. So there is so much to say on this topic, and we do want to make sure there is some time for questions. So we are planning to stay on a little bit longer. I know the scheduled end time was 1 p.m., but for folks who can stay, we'll stay on until maybe 1:10, 1:15. If you do need to hop off, we will share the recording, and we're always happy to connect you to the panelists. So finally, last but not least, definitely not least, we have Angie de la Peña. She is an environmental lawyer and activist. She is part of Por el Mar, an Argentinian NGO dedicated to marine conservation, coordinating their projects in Tierra del Fuego. She chose Ushuaia as her home and since then has advocated towards banning open net salmon farming and protecting its landscapes and ecosystems. With a conviction that communities can thrive through respectful food practices, she is committed to strengthening the bond between people and territory by appreciating local species and identity. Thank you so much for the introduction. Well, I must warn you that English is not my native language, so I'm gonna do my best and try to be clear, but please, if you have any questions or you need to stop me to ask me something, don't hesitate. So I'm gonna tell you a little bit about our fight or our campaign in Tierra del Fuego. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ángeles de la Peña, Angie. I work at Por el Mar. It's For the Sea. It's an NGO here in Argentina, which is part of the GSFR, the Global Salmon Farming Alliance. Next slide, please. Well, that's me. And on to the next, please. So I'm gonna tell you a bit about our story and why how it was like the turning point for the GSFR, because the GSFR was created after the salmon farming was banned here in Tierra del Fuego, particularly in Ushuaia and Rio Grande, which are the most important cities and coastal cities. In 2018, the Norwegian government and the Argentinian national government signed an agreement to start salmon farming in the Beagle Channel. So we started asking people here and trying to imagine what we should do to stop this industry, because we had our neighbors here in Chile, their example, and they told us what would happen if the salmon farming industry would have come here to our waters. So Argentina is a country that doesn't usually consume seafood. It's mostly intensive agriculture. So we don't have a culture that it's very related to the sea through food, through food consumption. So that was a challenge to us. So we reached out to the chefs, our most important chefs here in Argentina, to try to understand if they sold salmon, if they knew where the salmon came from, and if they could help us tell the people not to eat it and why it was important. So we have a lot of great seafood here: sea bass, sea urchins, kelp forests. There's a lot of abundance, but since we don't eat it, there's like people tend to eat salmon because it's like sushi, or it's marketing and all of those tactics that Natasha was mentioning before, no? How it's healthy. So we had to debunk all that strategies and try to tell people not to consume it. So next slide, please. This was our path. So the first thing that we did was a survey to Argentinian folks here to ask them if they knew what they're eating. Next slide, please. These were the results. People thought it was healthy food. They had no idea where it came from. This was done in 2018, so the results today would be a little bit different, I think, because at that moment, people were not that invested in protecting the environment, and lucky for us, that has changed in the past few years. But what the survey told us that it was that people were very particularly preoccupied for their health. So we had to attack that point in particular to use it for our campaign. Next slide, please. These are a few photos. We had to do a lot of things. That is the National Congress here in Argentina. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. This is our campaign with our chefs. Francis Manman is one of the most important and renowned chefs here in Argentina, and Lino is our most renowned chef in Tierra del Fuego. So they teamed up and started a huge campaign
to remove salmon from their tables and to speak to the people to stop eating this product. Next slide, please. This is an event that we did in Ushuaia, Tierra del Fuego, where Francis was cooking king crab, our most important crab in our waters. We invited legislators, everyone in the city, because our goal was to involve as much people as we could from different sectors, different areas, so that they could understand why it was important not to to prevent salmon farming from coming here to Argentina. Next slide, please. That was a photo that we took of the event. Next slide, please. So in May 2019, two legislators presented a bill to our legislative council here in Tierra del Fuego to forbid salmon farming. They were the first two that were convinced that we had to promote protecting what we had instead of bringing something different and destroying the sea. But it wasn't enough, because we had to convince the rest of the people, the rest of the legislature and the government to stop this from happening. Next slide, please. So we did an economic study. Next slide, please. We had to base our campaign in scientific and social and specific information. And since Argentina is a very challenging country economically and socially, there's a lot of necessities that had to be taken care of. So the salmon industry promised 1,000 jobs, but when we did this economic study with 3 economists here from Tierra del Fuego, they did numbers for 6 farms that they were going to install here in the Beagle Channel, and the actual numbers were that because of the production, it would only employ 75 people, from which 48 were going to be probably brought from Norway or Chile, because we don't have the requirements and the knowledge to do such an industry, to do such a job. Next slide, please. And we had to counterpart it with tourism, because what we knew at that point is that in 2019, tourism generated 16,500 jobs. So it's much more than what would salmon farming would generate. The thing is, we had to show the government that if the salmon industry were to install in the Beagle Channel or in the waters here that surround Tierra del Fuego, which are very renowned even because of the Antarctic tourism, that numbers would have been destroyed, or at least affected, because no one would want to come to here, to Tierra del Fuego, and to see the farms and the ocean depleted and contaminated because of the industry. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So we did a documentary that would, next slide, please, that would show these different things: the scientific information, the biodiversity information, the social information, and the economic. And with each visualization, people can cite a petition to stop salmon farming, and that went to the legislature, and we raised thousands of signatures that were presented, and that helped us generate a solid base of the community involvement and commitment to stop this from happening. It wasn't that much about stopping salmon farming, but embracing and protecting in which way our province wanted to develop, which things wanted to develop, a sustainable artisanal fishing, tourism, and things that brought the community pride and about who they were. Next slide, please. Those are the emails that went to the legislature, but it's okay. And we did something that personally was one of my favorite moments of the campaign, because I don't know if you know, but Chile and Argentina had almost a war 20 years ago, a little bit more, 30 years ago. But thanks to Chile and the information that they told us is that we are here protecting our water. So we joined in the middle of the Beagle Channel, people from Chile and people from Argentina in the middle of the pandemic. We had 40 kayaks and different sailboats. And we meet up in the middle of the channel and with a flag that said no to salmon farming. And it was, for that moment, it was massive. And that got to press, got a lot of attention and helped us show that people were really standing for the protection of the sea. So if you could go to the next slide, please. This is a video, it's a very short video. It doesn't have to with the sound. Don't worry, I can speak over it. So for those of you who have been to Argentina or not, I'll be expecting you here. But these are the nautic community was very important because they are the ones who are in the sea. We had to involve everyone we could, and these are the images of the places which have been destroyed in the salmon farming installed here. So we sailed to the next island and got in front with Chile. It was very heartwarming because we also teamed up with the First Nations there. This is David Alday from the Yagan community from Chile, and Cristina Calderon, which will appear in the video, was the last. She passed away a few years ago, but was the last Yagan fluent speaker, and it was like a very emotional presence for her to be there and to speak about the importance of protecting our ancient ways of relating to the sea. Next slide, please. These are a few photos. In the left, you can see Cristina waving. Next slide, please. Next slide. So in 2021, salmon farming was prohibited here. But today, next slide, please. This is a few news from all over the world. Next slide, please. And that is a picture from the legislature. Today, salmon farming, it's being, but not salmon farming, but the law that prohibited salmon farming here in Argentina is trying to be modified in order to allow it to happen in the north shore of Tierra del Fuego in this island. And we are working very hard so that doesn't work, because even the economic context here is even harder than in 2018, and the tactics are even more intelligent from a part of the salmon industry. Lucky for us, people have already committed to this cause and know what they're eating or what they want to promote, and we don't know what will happen, but at least we have this as a track record to stop and doing it in the future. Next slide, please. Yay, we did it. Next slide, please. So this is a video from 2021 when the bill was approved, which was made by the community. It says it was the first country in the world, but actually it was Alaska, but we didn't want to correct them because there was such pride of being the first in doing such an endeavor that we didn't have the heart. But this is a result of a lot of things going on: activism, science, people getting together, getting informed, and this is why we do what we do and why we want to protect what we have. Because today, sustainable practices are on the table here in Argentina, but a few years ago, it didn't exist even in the conversation. So it was a massive challenge. But we are trying to bring that in always and protecting how we want to do things. And salmon farming the industry is very clever, and it's always trying to get to the government, to people in power. Today, we don't have international pressure to do it, but we do have national pressure and different industries here that want to do salmon farming, and we are we are just like we are scared. I'm not gonna lie, but I hope that it doesn't come through, because people have learned a lot through this process and are very proud of what they did, because it wasn't just the due to an NGO, or it was a collective, a collective, how do you say, logro, a collective win in such a way. So those are the things that we are trying to promote, that are mostly related on how we relate amongst ourselves and to the place that we live, in order to strengthen that love for the place. And then salmon farming, perhaps we don't have stand a chance against that, against sustainable ways of living, or artisanal fishing and tourism, or practices that we are very proud of protecting. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Angie. What a powerful campaign. Amazing to see, people fighting to have a say in the decisions that affect their homes and their lives. So it's so important for us in these times to hear those stories of victory. So I appreciate you sharing with us.
Thank you. Thank you for the patience with my English.
You did great. So maybe we'll just take one or two questions for those who can stay on. I know James has been monitoring the chat. I haven't seen questions come on the chat, but
Nothing on the chat. So go ahead,
okay.
Fanny.
Yeah, I mean, if folks want to just verbally say their questions, feel free to raise your hand and we could just go with that. Thanks all for staying on long. I can ask one question to wrap it up if no one else has questions, but would prefer for if folks who are here, if you have any questions for any of the panelists.
I have a question.
Yes, go for it.
Thank you. I'm just curious about this. I really appreciated in the I think it was Natasha in the first presentation, if I'm looking at my notes right, apologies if I'm not, but was just talking about sort of these parallel comparisons you can make between terrestrial agriculture and then, so that people have a good visualization of that, and then how we need those similar comparisons when we're giving these examples. And I just wondered if anybody was kind of working on that, because that is something that has come up before about like people understand CAFOs and like the context when we're talking about on land, but not having the right language there. I'm just so many smart people here. I'm curious if anybody's working on that and has a solution. I thought that was a really important comment. Thank you.
I'm not sure if it was me, but yeah, just the extent to which we bumped up to something similar is, like CAFOs, industrialized farms, the environmental harms of like the manure pits and all of that kind of stuff. I think one of the problems that we face for people who care about our relationship with aquatic systems is that it's sort of invisibilized. Like, I don't know what the right word is, but it's like it's hard to see. We don't spend time underwater. I think that's like Angie's campaigns where you're actually going under the water and taking images and going out onto the water seems crucial, because most human beings don't spend a lot of their life underwater. So it's almost like it's a big blank. And so the more sort of specificity and traction that we can put on in terms of like our complex ecosystems, there's, these incredible lives that are being lived under the water, and that it's incredibly resilient, but it's also fragile. I mean, you destroy a coral reef and it's destroyed. And it takes tens of thousands of years for a coral reef to become what we see today. So I think really sort of working hard to also do two things at once. One is to like make those ecosystems really vibrant and real for people, and then also to draw the parallels for the destruction that can happen to what we see daily on land in our lived experience.
Natasha, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, thanks, Fanny. Yeah, I just wanted to add that the parallels that I see, because we at Foodrise we've done quite a lot of work looking at financial flows into both land-based agriculture and salmon farming earlier this year. So I guess one of the common denominators as well is the huge money that has gone into, and I'm talking billions that has gone into developing these industries because they are perceived as offering good returns on investment. So for me, that's got to be one of the the key drivers of the growth of these industries that doesn't often get talked about. You often hear the statement, meat production has grown whatever it is fivefold since 1960, but why has it grown? It's grown because money has been pumped into expanding these huge CAFOs and industrial livestock units, and the same is true of salmon farming. The Norwegian government says salmon farming is its sort of second. It considers salmon farming to be its second most important economic sector, and has put huge resources into developing that industry and taking it global. So yeah, just a comment on that, which I'm sure many of you are aware of, but it's definitely a common denominator.
Thank you for that. We have a question from Antonio, so maybe we'll just end with his question. So Antonio, do you want to unmute or do you want me to read your question?
I can ask the question. It is about what is the more effective kind of campaign, because obviously consumers are for most of what it was said are key on preventing the growth of aquaculture. But if, for instance, science is silence because there's not being published in terms of the effects of aquaculture, and there's this enormous amount of money to make this food cheap, how we can really be effective on stopping this damaging process. Thank you.
Since it's about the science, I don't want to talk too much, but the extent to which the science is, I think, so this is a problem across science in general, especially with aquatic systems, that like the things that we know about aquatic systems, unlike terrestrial systems, are entirely driven by industry. So there's been like multiple analyses that have done this. So there's like 30,000, just as an example, there's 30,000 different species of fish. We know very little about most of them. The ones that we know anything about are the ones that have like economic value, either through aquaculture or the marine trade, aquariums, home aquarium trade, which is a big industry as well, and also now part of aquaculture. So I think one thing that could be helpful is to like help nurture scientists understand that that there's these larger issues at stake, and that like yeah, like encouraging, I don't know how you can do this, but like just like welcoming scientists into these sort of communities, even young scientists, to speak, and then in the process of speaking, hear the work that people like Angie and Cassandra are doing. I think that I don't think it's something about scientists. I think it's something about like the system and how it gets funded. And so like that is not like scientists are bad and want to like support industry. It's just like that's where the funding comes from. That's where the center of gravity is right now. I think it's very changeable. It just needs to be sort of nurtured into existence.
All right. Thanks, Chef Cassandra. She had to hop, but she named a few ways to influence consumers through food festivals and events. So like joyful celebrations and things like this. Angie, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything around strategies for influencing consumers. No pressure.
Well, I think in our case, it probably it's a bit easier because since we don't consume that much seafood and salmon, it's like here it's not cheap, it's an elite product. So that was easy for us because we tried to talk about the food security and how food got to most of the community and not so much to a small percentage of people. So in that way, we try to promote consuming seafood here, especially local, and it's cheaper than salmon. So in that sense, it's easier for us. And here, scientists, since we don't have the salmon farming industry, are not funded by the salmon industry. So they study, of course, species that have economic value, but at least there are local species. So when we had to like talk about one versus the other, local people tend to have like a more sense of pride of what we have and not so much of what could arrive here, which was promoted by huge industries and like economic power. And that was like a turning point in our campaign, like to strengthen the community itself and what they want to do and what they want to eat, and specifically because it's more affordable to eat local than to import other products. And here, the 100% of salmon is from Chile, and they use like blue washing campaigns, and it says Antarctic salmon and things like that. But actually, we did a request, a legal request in one of our food and health national authorities here to label salmon products, because they used to say Antarctic salmon or Patagonic salmon, which was like it was a lie. People don't tend to, like, I don't know, check where they buy from. So it didn't go through, but at least we did it, and it was one of the things that we used to tell people what they were eating.
Thank you. That's a great point to maybe focus on boosting the species that are locally abundant rather than just putting all your efforts into blocking the farmed salmon.
Yeah.
Well, we're on for an extra 25 minutes. So I really appreciate everyone who stayed to this point, and a huge thanks to our panelists. You've shared an incredible wealth of knowledge with us. So thank you for that. And thank you for everyone for joining us today. We'll be in touch with recordings and resources. So
yeah. Thanks so much.
care.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.